The sun had barely kissed the horizon when Alpha Team received their orders. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison studied the mission briefing in the dim light of the forward operating base, his weathered hands tracing the topographical lines of the Afghan mountains they'd be infiltrating within the hour. At 34, Morrison had led more operations than he cared to count, but something about this particular mission made his instincts prickle with unease. The intelligence was thin, almost suspiciously so. Reports indicated a high-value target had been spotted moving through the remote valleys of Helmand province, supposedly coordinating Taliban operations across 3 districts. The mission seemed straightforward enough: insert via helicopter, conduct surveillance, gather intelligence, and extract before dawn the following day. But Morrison had learned long ago that the simplest missions often carried the deadliest surprises. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez sat across from him, methodically checking his weapon for the 3rd time that evening. At 29, Rodriguez was the team's communications specialist and Morrison's most trusted sergeant. His dark eyes reflected years of combat experience, and, like Morrison, he seemed to sense something amiss about their assignment. "Intel feels rushed, sir," Rodriguez muttered quietly, ensuring his voice didn't carry beyond Morrison's ears. 24 hours from briefing to insertion. That's not normal for a target this significant. Morrison nodded grimly. The same thought had been nagging at him since receiving the orders. Typically, missions targeting high-value individuals required weeks of preparation, multiple intelligence confirmations, and extensive planning sessions. This operation felt different, almost desperate in its urgency. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chen was sprawled on his bunk nearby, seemingly relaxed, but Morrison knew better. Chen's apparent casualness was deceptive. The 26-year-old demolitions expert was like a coiled spring, always ready for action. His youthful face masked a brilliant tactical mind and nerves of steel that had saved the team more times than Morrison could remember. "Anyone else notice how quiet command's been about support assets?" Chen asked casually, not looking up from the magazine he was pretending to read. "No mention of air cover, quick reaction force, or even dedicated medevac." Morrison's jaw tightened. Chen was right. Usually, missions into hostile territory included extensive support planning. The absence of such details suggested either supreme confidence in the mission's simplicity or a deliberate omission that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Petty Officer Second Class David Kim, the team's medic, looked up from his medical supplies. At 27, Kim had seen enough battlefield trauma to last several lifetimes, yet he maintained an optimistic demeanor that often served as the team's emotional anchor during difficult operations. However, even Kim's usually cheerful expression seemed strained this evening. Medical briefing was practically non-existent, Kim observed quietly. No specific threat assessment, no intelligence on enemy capabilities in the area. Just standard trauma protocols. The 5th member of their team, Petty Officer Second Class Brandon Walsh, was conducting his final equipment check near the window. At 25, Walsh served as their sniper and reconnaissance specialist. His pale blue eyes could spot targets at distances that seemed impossible, and his steady hands had eliminated threats before they even knew Alpha Team existed. "Satellite imagery shows some interesting details they didn't mention in briefing," Walsh said softly, his Texas drawl barely audible. "Saw at least 3 defensive positions that weren't marked on our maps. Terrain's more complex than they indicated too." The final member of Alpha Team sat alone in the corner, seemingly detached from the conversation, but Morrison knew Petty Officer Third Class Rico Santos was absorbing every word. At 23, Santos was their newest member, but his skills in close-quarters combat and infiltration had already proven invaluable. Santos rarely spoke unless he had something important to contribute, and his silence often spoke louder than words. Morrison closed the briefing folder and looked around at his team. These 5 men had become more than fellow soldiers. They were brothers bound by shared dangers and mutual trust. Each had saved the other's lives multiple times, and Morrison would trust any of them with his own life without hesitation. "Gentlemen, I know we all feel something's off about this mission," Morrison said quietly. "But we have our orders, and we'll execute them professionally. However, I want everyone on high alert from the moment we insert. Trust your instincts, watch each other's backs, and be ready for anything." The team nodded silently. They'd operated together long enough to communicate volumes without speaking. Each man understood that their survival often depended on subtle cues and unspoken warnings that only came from months of shared combat experience. As they gathered their gear and prepared for helicopter insertion, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much more dangerous than a simple reconnaissance mission. The intelligence briefing had been too vague, the support planning too minimal, and the urgency too artificial. Someone wanted Alpha Team in those mountains quickly, but Morrison was beginning to suspect the reasons weren't entirely what they'd been told. The helicopter ride to their insertion point was unusually quiet. Normally, the team would engage in light banter or final equipment checks, but tonight each man seemed lost in his own thoughts. The aircraft flew low and fast through mountain passes that twisted like serpents through the rugged terrain, the pilot expertly navigating valleys barely wide enough for the helicopter's rotor span. Morrison studied the landscape passing below through night vision equipment. The mountains were barren and hostile, carved by centuries of wind and weather into a maze of ridges, canyons, and hidden valleys. It was perfect terrain for ambushes, with countless positions offering concealment and excellent fields of fire. Any enemy force familiar with the area would have significant advantages over intruders. 2 minutes to insertion, the pilot announced through their headsets. Morrison's team immediately shifted into mission mode. Each man checked his weapon one final time, verified communication equipment was functional, and mentally reviewed their planned route to the observation position. They'd done this hundreds of times before, but routine never replaced vigilance in hostile territory. The helicopter descended into a narrow valley, its rotors stirring up clouds of dust and debris. Morrison could see their insertion point approaching, a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that would provide immediate cover once they disembarked. The pilot expertly brought the aircraft down, hovering just inches above the ground to minimize time on target. "Go, go, go!" Morrison shouted. Alpha Team poured out of the helicopter in seconds, each man immediately moving to predetermined positions around the landing zone. Morrison was the last to exit, ensuring all his men were safely on the ground before the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. The sudden silence was deafening after the helicopter's rotor noise. Morrison listened intently, straining to detect any sounds that might indicate enemy presence. The mountains were eerily quiet, with only the whisper of wind through rocky crevices breaking the stillness. Rodriguez's voice crackled softly through Morrison's earpiece. "Comms check, all stations." Each team member responded in turn, confirming their communication equipment was functioning properly. Morrison felt marginally better knowing they could maintain contact with each other and, if necessary, call for extraction. "Alpha 1, this is Alpha 6, Morrison whispered into his microphone, using their tactical call signs. "Beginning movement to observation point. Maintain standard intervals and watch for movement." The team began their careful advance through the rocky terrain. Each man moved like a ghost, using natural cover and staying in constant visual contact with his teammates. Their destination was a ridge overlooking the valley where their target was supposedly operating, approximately 2 kilometers from their insertion point. Morrison took point, with Rodriguez following at 20-meter intervals. Chen and Kim maintained the center positions, while Walsh provided overwatch from elevated positions when possible. Santos brought up the rear, ensuring nobody was following their route and watching for threats approaching from behind. The terrain was more challenging than their maps had indicated. Rocky slopes were loose and treacherous, threatening to send cascades of stones tumbling down the mountainside with every step. Deep ravines appeared without warning, forcing the team to find alternate routes that added time and distance to their movement. After 2 hours of careful movement, Morrison called a halt. They'd covered less than half the distance to their observation point, and he was beginning to suspect their mission timeline was unrealistic. The terrain was simply too difficult to navigate quickly while maintaining operational security. "Alpha 6, this is Alpha 2, Rodriguez whispered through the communication system. "Getting some interesting radio chatter. Multiple stations, non-standard frequencies." Morrison felt his blood chill. Non-standard radio frequencies often indicated enemy forces using captured or improvised communication equipment. If hostile forces were operating in the area with sophisticated communications, Alpha Team could be walking into a well-prepared ambush. "Can you determine locations or intentions?" Morrison asked quietly. "Negative, Alpha 6. Signals are intermittent and heavily encrypted. But there's definitely organized activity in this valley." Morrison weighed their options carefully. They could abort the mission and request extraction, but that would require justification to command that might not be well received. Alternatively, they could continue with extreme caution, gathering intelligence about whatever was actually happening in these mountains. "All stations, this is Alpha 6. We continue mission, but threat level is now elevated.
Assume hostile presence and act accordingly. The team acknowledged Morrison's transmission and adjusted their movement accordingly.
Intervals between men increased, routes became more circuitous to avoid potential observation points, and everyone's weapons were ready for immediate action. As they approached a narrow pass between two towering peaks, Walsh's voice came through their earpieces with urgent intensity.
Alpha 6, this is Alpha 4. Multiple heat signatures ahead, approximately 800 meters. Count at least 6 individuals, possibly more.
Morrison signaled the team to take cover immediately. Each man found concealment among the rocks and waited for further instructions. Morrison crawled forward to Walsh's position, where the sniper was studying the area ahead through his high-powered scope.
"What do you see?" Morrison whispered.
Walsh handed him the scope. "Look at that ridge line, about 10 degrees left of that prominent rock formation." Morrison peered through the scope and immediately understood Walsh's concern. 6 figures were clearly visible moving along the ridge, and their movement patterns indicated military training. They weren't farmers or herders, these were armed fighters conducting what appeared to be a patrol pattern. Professional movement, coordinated spacing, and they're definitely armed, Morrison observed quietly. "That's not all, sir," Walsh continued.
"See that depression about 200 meters to their right? More heat signatures, but these ones aren't moving. Looks like a prepared position." Morrison studied the area Walsh indicated and felt his concern deepen.
If enemy forces had established prepared positions in the area, Alpha Team was potentially surrounded without even knowing it.
The mission was rapidly evolving from reconnaissance to survival. "Alpha 6, this is Alpha 5, Santos' voice came through their earpieces with controlled urgency. "Movement to our rear.
At least 3 individuals approximately 600 meters back along our route." Morrison's mind raced through tactical options. Enemy forces ahead, prepared positions flanking their route, and now movement behind them suggested Alpha Team had walked into a carefully planned trap. Someone had known they were coming and had positioned forces to intercept them.
"All stations, this is Alpha 6.
We're potentially compromised. Prepare for immediate action."
"Alpha 2, attempt to establish contact with command for emergency extraction." Rodriguez's response was immediate and unwelcome. "Alpha 6, Alpha 2.
Unable to establish communication with base.
All frequencies are being jammed."
Morrison closed his eyes briefly, processing the implications. Communication jamming required sophisticated equipment and detailed knowledge of their operational frequencies. This wasn't a chance encounter with random Taliban fighters, this was a coordinated ambush by enemies who had specific intelligence about Alpha Team's mission. The trap was closing around them, and Morrison realized that their simple reconnaissance mission had been compromised from the beginning. Someone had wanted Alpha Team in these mountains, but not for the reasons they'd been told. Now 6 Navy SEALs were alone in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies who seemed to know exactly where they were and what they were doing. Morrison made a decision that would determine whether his team lived or died in the next few hours.
They couldn't retreat the way they'd come, couldn't advance toward their original objective, and couldn't call for help.
Their only option was to find a defensive position and fight their way out of the trap that had been so carefully prepared for them.
"All stations, Alpha 6. We're changing the mission. Survival is now our primary objective."
Morrison's decision to prioritize survival over mission completion sent a clear signal to his team that their situation had deteriorated beyond acceptable risk levels. Each member of Alpha Team immediately shifted their mindset from reconnaissance to combat, knowing that the next few hours would test every skill they'd learned and every bond they'd forged. The team leader quickly assessed their tactical situation. They occupied a position roughly halfway up a mountain slope, with rocky outcroppings providing limited cover but no real defensive advantage. Enemy forces were positioned ahead, behind, and possibly on their flanks, suggesting a coordinated effort to trap them in a killing zone.
Morrison's mind raced through possible escape routes. Moving upward toward the peaks would expose them on open slopes with no cover, making them easy targets for enemy marksmen.
Descending toward the valley floor would take them directly toward the largest concentration of hostile forces. Their only viable option seemed to be moving laterally along the mountainside, hoping to find terrain that might offer better defensive positions.
"Alpha 4, what's your assessment of that ridge system to our north?"
Morrison asked Walsh quietly. Walsh studied the terrain through his scope for several moments before responding. "Looks like it might offer some cover and concealment, but we'd have to cross about 400 meters of relatively open ground to reach it.
That's a lot of exposure time.
Before Morrison could respond, Chen's voice came through their communication system with controlled urgency.
Alpha 6, this is Alpha 3. Hearing mechanical sounds from the valley floor. Sounds like vehicles approaching.
Morrison felt his stomach tighten. Vehicle-mounted weapons would dramatically change the tactical equation, giving enemy forces firepower and mobility advantages that would make escape extremely difficult. If their opponents had access to heavy weapons or armed vehicles, Alpha Team's small arms would be severely outmatched.
Can you determine types or numbers? Morrison asked.
Negative, sir. Sounds being distorted by the terrain, but definitely multiple engines.
Could be trucks, could be lighter vehicles. Hard to tell from this distance.
Morrison knew they were running out of time to make tactical decisions. Every moment they remained in their current position allowed enemy forces to tighten the encirclement and bring additional resources to bear. However, moving prematurely could expose them to concentrated fire from multiple directions. Kim's voice interrupted Morrison's tactical calculations.
Alpha 6, this is Alpha 5. Santos is reporting movement on our left flank. Looks like they're trying to get above us.
Morrison crawled to Santos' position and peered through the darkness toward the area Kim had indicated. Even through night vision equipment, the movement was subtle, but Santos' sharp eyes had detected what appeared to be at least 3 figures working their way up a parallel ridge system that would eventually give them a commanding view of Alpha Team's position.
How long before they reach overwatch positions? Morrison asked Santos quietly.
The youngest member of the team studied the terrain carefully before responding. Maybe 15 minutes if they maintain current pace.
Once they get elevation advantage, we'll be in serious trouble. Morrison understood the implications immediately.
Enemy forces approaching from multiple directions, vehicle support arriving from the valley, and hostile fighters moving to positions that would allow them to fire down on Alpha Team's location. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and decisive action was required within minutes rather than hours.
All stations, this is Alpha 6. We're moving in 3 minutes. Alpha 4 will provide overwatch while we displace to that ridge system north of our position. Movement will be by pairs, bounds of 50 meters maximum.
The team acknowledged Morrison's instructions and began preparing for what they all knew would be a dangerous movement under potentially hostile observation.
Each man checked his equipment one final time, ensuring nothing would rattle or reflect light during their movement.
Rodriguez moved up beside Morrison and spoke quietly. "Sir, I'm still getting that radio chatter."
Sounds like they're coordinating something big. Multiple call signs, lots of activity. Morrison nodded grimly.
The radio traffic Rodriguez was intercepting suggested their opponents were well organized and possibly receiving external support or coordination. This wasn't a random encounter with local fighters, this was a sophisticated operation conducted by enemies with training, equipment, and intelligence capabilities. Walsh had positioned himself behind a large boulder that offered excellent fields of fire toward the areas where enemy movement had been detected. His sniper rifle was ready, and Morrison knew that Walsh could accurately engage targets at distances that would surprise most opponents.
Alpha 4, you'll have maybe 10 seconds to engage any targets that present themselves during our movement, Morrison told Walsh. After that, you displace to catch up with the team.
Walsh nodded silently, his pale blue eyes already scanning potential target areas through his rifle scope. Morrison had complete confidence in Walsh's abilities, but he also knew that one sniper couldn't suppress multiple enemy positions indefinitely.
Alpha 3 and Alpha 5, your first pair.
Move to that cluster of rocks approximately 75 meters northwest of our current position, Morrison instructed Chen and Kim. The 2 SEALs acknowledged the instruction and prepared for movement. Chen carried the team's explosive charges and specialized demolition equipment, while Kim bore the medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death if anyone was wounded during their escape attempt. Morrison watched the surrounding terrain carefully, looking for any indication that enemy forces were aware of their planned movement. The mountainside remained eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of approaching vehicles breaking the stillness.
Execute, Morrison commanded quietly.
Chen and Kim rose from their concealed positions and began moving across the rocky terrain as quickly as silence would allow. They used natural cover whenever possible, darting between boulders and staying low to minimize their visibility against the skyline. Morrison held his breath as the 2 SEALs crossed the most exposed portion of their route. For several seconds, they were completely vulnerable to enemy fire from multiple directions.
Walsh tracked potential threat areas through his scope, ready to engage any enemy fighters who might reveal their positions by firing at the moving Americans.
Chen and Kim reached their designated position without incident and immediately took cover among the rocks. Morrison felt marginally relieved, but he knew the most dangerous movements were yet to come. Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, next pair, Morrison announced, indicating that he and Rodriguez would move next. Rodriguez gathered his communication equipment and weapon while Morrison took one last look at their original position. In a few minutes, they would abandon this location forever, and Morrison wanted to ensure they weren't leaving behind any equipment or intelligence that could be useful to their enemies.
"Ready, sir," Rodriguez whispered.
Morrison and Rodriguez began their movement across the exposed terrain. Morrison could feel the weight of potentially hostile eyes watching from unknown positions as they navigated between rocky obstacles and patches of loose stone that threatened to send noisy cascades down the mountainside. Halfway across the danger area, Morrison heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoing through the mountains. His blood froze as he waited to see if one of his men had been hit, but Walsh's voice came through their earpieces with calm professionalism.
"Alpha 6, Alpha 4. Eliminated one target attempting to engage your movement. Multiple additional targets now visible and beginning to maneuver."
Morrison and Rodriguez increased their pace, knowing that Walsh's shot had revealed their general location to every enemy force in the area. They reached Chen and Kim's position just as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, muzzle flashes flickering like deadly fireflies across the mountainside.
"Alpha 4, Alpha 6. Displace immediately," Morrison commanded into his microphone. Walsh fired two more carefully aimed shots before abandoning his overwatch position and sprinting toward the team's new location.
Enemy bullets began striking the rocks around Walsh's former position, sending fragments of stone whistling through the air where the sniper had been moments earlier. Santos was the last team member to move, and his route took him across the most exposed terrain of all. Enemy forces had now identified Alpha Team's general location and were concentrating their fire on likely movement routes.
Morrison watched through night vision equipment as Santos began his desperate sprint toward their position.
The young SEAL moved like a ghost, using every available piece of cover and changing direction unpredictably to avoid enemy fire. Bullets struck the ground around Santos' feet, kicking up small geysers of dirt and stone fragments. Morrison could hear the angry buzz of rounds passing close to the running SEAL's head, and he prepared to provide covering fire if Santos was pinned down in the open. Walsh reached the team's position and immediately began engaging enemy targets with his sniper rifle, trying to suppress the fire directed at Santos. Chen and Kim added their weapons to the effort, sending controlled bursts toward muzzle flashes they could identify in the darkness. Santos dove behind a large boulder just as concentrated enemy fire began striking his previous route. The young SEAL was breathing hard but appeared uninjured as he took position with the rest of Alpha Team. "Sound off," Morrison commanded, wanting to ensure all his men were present and capable. Each team member responded in turn, confirming they were in position and ready for action. Morrison felt a moment of relief that they'd successfully displaced without casualties, but he knew their tactical situation remained extremely dangerous. The enemy forces were now actively maneuvering to surround their new position, and the sound of vehicles from the valley was growing louder. Morrison estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrived with heavy weapons that could devastate their defensive position. "Alpha 2, any luck re-establishing communications?" Morrison asked Rodriguez. "Negative, sir. Jamming is complete across all our frequencies. They definitely know our communication protocols." Morrison's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. Their enemies possessed detailed intelligence about Alpha Team's operational procedures, communication frequencies, and possibly even their planned mission route. This suggested either a significant intelligence leak or the involvement of sophisticated adversaries with electronic warfare capabilities. Walsh suddenly raised his hand, signaling for complete silence. The team froze in place as Walsh listened intently to sounds that weren't immediately obvious to the others. After several moments, Walsh spoke quietly into his microphone. Multiple vehicles stopped approximately 800 meters down the valley. "Sounds like personnel dismounting and organizing. Estimate at least 20 individuals, possibly more." Morrison closed his eyes and calculated rapidly. Enemy forces approaching from multiple directions, vehicle-mounted reinforcements organizing in the valley, communication systems jammed, and no possibility of calling for help.
Alpha Team was facing overwhelming odds with limited ammunition and no support.
Chen moved close to Morrison and spoke quietly. "Sir, I've got enough charges to make things interesting if they try to assault our position."
"Might buy us some time." Morrison nodded, appreciating Chen's tactical thinking.
Defensive demolitions could channel enemy movement and inflict casualties on attacking forces, but they wouldn't solve Alpha Team's fundamental problem of being outnumbered and outgunned. Kim checked his medical supplies and spoke softly. "Everyone's still healthy, but if we take casualties, our mobility goes to hell quickly in this terrain."
Morrison understood Kim's concern.
Carrying wounded team members across mountainous terrain while under fire would be extremely difficult, potentially impossible if multiple SEALs were seriously injured. The sound of gunfire erupted from the valley floor, but Morrison quickly realized the enemy forces weren't shooting at Alpha Team. Someone else was engaging the hostile forces that had been preparing to assault the SEAL's position. Walsh peered through his scope toward the valley and reported with surprise in his voice.
"Alpha 6, someone's engaging the vehicle positions. Can't identify who, but they're putting accurate fire on the enemy forces down there."
Morrison felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion.
Who could be fighting their enemies? Had another American unit been deployed to the area? Was this some kind of interfactional conflict among hostile forces?
The gunfire from the valley intensified, and Morrison could hear vehicles starting engines and beginning to move. Through the darkness, he could see muzzle flashes from multiple weapons engaging each other in what appeared to be a significant firefight.
"Alpha 4, can you identify the unknown friendlies?" Morrison asked Walsh. Walsh studied the valley through his scope for several minutes before responding with uncertainty. "Negative identification, sir.
Too much movement and muzzle flash to get a clear picture. But, whoever they are, they're definitely engaging our opponents with what sounds like professional tactics." Morrison made a rapid tactical decision. If unknown forces were engaging their enemies, Alpha Team might have an opportunity to escape while the hostiles were distracted. However, they'd have to move immediately before the situation in the valley resolved one way or another.
"All stations, this is Alpha 6. We're displacing again while our opponents are engaged elsewhere.
Same movement procedures, but we're heading for that high ground to the east." The team acknowledged Morrison's instructions and prepared for another dangerous movement across exposed terrain. As they began to move, none of them could have imagined that salvation would soon come from the most unexpected source possible. The firefight in the valley provided Alpha Team with the distraction Morrison desperately needed to move his men toward more defensible terrain. As they began their movement toward the eastern ridge, the intensity of gunfire below suggested a significant engagement between well-armed forces. Morrison could distinguish at least 4 different weapon signatures, indicating multiple combatants with varying equipment and training levels. Chen and Kim moved first, using the rocky terrain to mask their movement while the attention of enemy forces remained focused on the valley floor.
Morrison watched through night vision equipment as his 2 teammates navigated between boulders and across patches of loose stone that could easily betray their position if disturbed carelessly. The distant sound of an explosion echoed through the mountains, followed by the unmistakable roar of a vehicle engine under full acceleration.
Morrison couldn't determine if the explosion had been caused by their unknown allies or the enemy forces they'd been tracking, but the chaos in the valley was definitely working to Alpha Team's advantage. Rodriguez moved up beside Morrison and spoke quietly. "Sir, I'm intercepting radio traffic from the valley.
Multiple stations reporting casualties and requesting reinforcement.
Sounds like whoever's down there is giving our opponents serious problems." Morrison felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. The radio traffic Rodriguez was monitoring suggested that enemy forces were taking significant casualties from their unknown attackers. However, Morrison still had no idea who was fighting their opponents or whether these mysterious allies would prove friendly to American forces. Walsh provided overwatch from his concealed position, his sniper rifle trained on areas where enemy movement might threaten the team's displacement. Through his high-powered scope, Walsh could observe details of the valley engagement that weren't visible to other team members.
"Alpha 6, this is Alpha 4, Walsh reported quietly. "The fighting down there is definitely professional level.
Coordinated fire and movement, effective use of cover and concealment.
These aren't random fighters."
Morrison acknowledged Walsh's observation while continuing to monitor Chen and Kim's progress across the exposed terrain. The 2 SEALs had covered approximately half the distance to their next position when Santos suddenly raised his hand, signaling detection of nearby movement. Santos pointed toward a ridge system approximately 300 meters to their south, where he detected what appeared to be human movement.
Morrison studied the area through night vision equipment but couldn't immediately identify specific threats in the complex terrain. How many and what direction? Morrison whispered to Santos. At least 2, possibly more.
Moving parallel to our route but slightly higher elevation.
Could be trying to get ahead of us.
Morrison's tactical situation became more complex as he realized enemy forces were potentially maneuvering to intercept Alpha Team's movement while other hostiles were engaged in the valley below. The coordination suggested sophisticated command and control capabilities among their opponents. Chen and Kim reached their designated position and immediately took defensive positions among the rocks. Their successful movement encouraged Morrison, but he knew the most dangerous portions of their displacement were yet to come. Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, next bound, Morrison announced to Rodriguez. Morrison and Rodriguez began their movement across the exposed terrain just as another explosion echoed from the valley, this one significantly larger than the first. The blast illuminated the mountainside briefly, creating shadows that danced across the rocky landscape before fading back into darkness. Halfway across their movement route, Morrison heard the crack of a high-powered rifle from somewhere on the mountainside above their position. His blood chilled as he waited to determine if one of his men had been targeted, but no cry of pain or call for medical assistance came through their communication system. Walsh's voice came through Morrison's earpiece with controlled excitement. Alpha 6, Alpha 4. Unknown marksman just eliminated a target that was preparing to engage your movement. Range approximately 600 meters, extremely accurate shot. Morrison felt confusion mixed with relief. Someone with exceptional marksmanship skills was apparently providing overwatch for Alpha Team's movement, but Morrison had no idea who this mysterious ally might be or why they were helping American forces.
Can you identify the shooter's position?
Morrison asked Walsh quietly.
Negative, sir.
Muzzle flash was extremely brief and well concealed. Whoever it is knows how to shoot without revealing their location. Morrison and Rodriguez reached their designated positions safely, joining Chen and Kim among the rocky outcroppings that provided cover from multiple directions. Morrison immediately began planning the next phase of their movement while trying to understand the tactical situation developing around them. Santos began his movement toward the team's position, taking a route that would minimize his exposure time but still required crossing approximately 60 meters of open ground.
Morrison watched anxiously as the youngest member of his team navigated between obstacles and across loose stone that threatened to cascade noisily down the mountainside. Another rifle shot cracked across the mountains, this time from a different location than the first. Walsh immediately began scanning for the source while Santos continued his movement toward the team's position.
Alpha 4, Alpha 6.
What do you see? Morrison asked Walsh.
Second shooter, different position, eliminated another target that was moving to intercept Santos.
We've got at least 2 unknown friendlies providing overwatch.
Morrison's mind raced through possibilities as he tried to understand who might be helping them.
Special operations forces from other branches of the military? Intelligence operatives? Local fighters opposed to the forces attacking Alpha Team? Santos reached the team's position safely and took cover beside Kim.
Morrison was relieved to have most of his team consolidated, but Walsh remained in an exposed overwatch position that was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy forces adjusted to the new tactical situation.
Alpha 4, displace immediately, Morrison commanded Walsh.
Walsh fired one more carefully aimed shot before abandoning his position and beginning his movement toward the team. Enemy fire immediately began striking his former location, indicating that hostile forces had finally identified his approximate position. As Walsh sprinted across the open ground, Morrison could see muzzle flashes from enemy weapons trying to track the running sniper's movement. Walsh used evasive maneuvers and natural cover effectively, but Morrison knew that luck could only protect his teammate for so long against concentrated enemy fire.
Suddenly, 3 rapid rifle shots echoed from elevated positions around the mountainside.
Each shot was followed by the immediate cessation of enemy fire from specific locations, suggesting that the unknown marksmen were systematically eliminating threats that endangered Walsh's movement. Walsh dove behind cover beside the rest of Alpha Team, breathing hard but apparently uninjured. Morrison felt profound gratitude toward their mysterious protectors, whoever they might be. Sound off, Morrison commanded, ensuring all his men were present and combat effective. Each team member responded positively, confirming they were ready for continued action. Morrison studied the terrain ahead and realized they'd successfully moved to a position that offered better defensive advantages while remaining concealed from most enemy observation points.
Rodriguez suddenly looked up from his communication equipment with excitement in his voice. Alpha 6, I'm getting something on an emergency frequency. Someone's trying to make contact.
Morrison moved beside Rodriguez and listened as static-filled transmissions began coming through their radio system. The voice was heavily distorted by distance and terrain, but Morrison could distinguish English words spoken with what sounded like an American accent.
Alpha Team, this is Guardian 6. Do you copy?
Morrison felt his heart race as he realized someone was specifically attempting to contact his team using their operational call sign. However, he had no knowledge of any unit designated Guardian 6, and he couldn't determine if this was a legitimate friendly contact or an enemy deception operation.
Should I respond, sir? Rodriguez asked quietly. Morrison weighed the risks carefully.
Responding to the transmission could reveal their exact location to enemy forces monitoring radio frequencies.
However, if Guardian 6 represented legitimate friendly forces, establishing contact could provide Alpha Team with desperately needed support.
Guardian 6, this is Alpha 6 Actual, Morrison transmitted cautiously.
Authenticate with current operational codes.
Several moments passed before the response came through their radio system.
Alpha 6, Guardian 6. Authentication is Bravo 77 Charlie.
We are providing overwatch and suppression of hostile forces in your area.
Morrison felt relief flood through him as he recognized legitimate military authentication codes.
Guardian 6, whoever they were, possessed current operational information that suggested they were indeed friendly forces.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Confirm you have eyes on our position and hostile forces in the area.
Affirmative, Alpha 6. We have been tracking enemy movement and providing targeted elimination of threats to your team. Estimate approximately 15 hostiles remaining in your immediate area, with vehicle support approximately 800 meters south of your current position. Morrison was amazed by the detailed intelligence Guardian 6 possessed about the tactical situation. Whoever these allies were, they had excellent observation capabilities and sophisticated intelligence gathering methods.
Guardian 6, can you provide extraction support or direct us toward safe routes out of the area? Morrison asked hopefully. Alpha 6, negative on immediate extraction capability. However, we can continue providing overwatch while you move toward designated pickup zone approximately 2 kilometers northeast of your current position.
Morrison studied his map and identified the area Guardian 6 had indicated. The route would require crossing challenging terrain and potentially moving through areas still controlled by enemy forces, but it offered their best hope of reaching safety. Chen moved beside Morrison and spoke quietly. Sir, the fighting in the valley has quieted down significantly. Sounds like one side or the other has gained control. Morrison listened carefully and realized Chen was correct. The intense gunfire that had been echoing from the valley for the past 20 minutes had diminished to occasional scattered shots. Either their unknown allies had defeated the enemy forces, or the hostiles had eliminated their opposition and were preparing to resume their assault on Alpha Team. Walsh peered through his scope toward the valley and provided updated intelligence.
Alpha 6, I can see multiple vehicle lights moving in the valley. Looks like they're organizing for movement in our direction.
Morrison felt his tactical situation becoming critical again. Enemy forces were apparently regaining control of the valley and preparing to resume their pursuit of Alpha Team. Even with Guardian 6 providing overwatch support, Alpha Team would be severely challenged by vehicle-mounted weapons and superior numbers.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6.
Enemy forces appear to be reorganizing for renewed assault.
Can you provide suppression of vehicle targets?
The response came immediately.
Alpha 6, affirmative. We have capabilities to engage vehicle targets. Recommend you begin immediate movement toward extraction point while we suppress enemy advance.
Morrison made the decision that would determine his team's survival. They would move toward the extraction point while Guardian 6 engaged the approaching enemy forces. It was a desperate gamble that relied on unknown allies with uncertain capabilities, but remaining in their current position guaranteed eventual destruction by overwhelming enemy forces.
All stations, this is Alpha 6. We're moving toward extraction point immediately.
Guardian 6 will provide overwatch and suppression.
Movement will be continuous with no halts unless absolutely necessary.
As Alpha Team prepared for their most dangerous movement yet, none of them could have imagined that their salvation depended on a lone marksman who had been watching over them since their insertion into the mountains, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal his presence and deadly capabilities. Alpha Team began their movement toward the extraction point with renewed urgency, knowing that enemy forces in the valley were reorganizing and would soon resume their pursuit with vehicle support and fresh personnel. Morrison led his men across increasingly treacherous terrain, following ridgelines and using natural cover to mask their movement from hostile observation. The route toward their designated pickup zone required crossing 3 major valley systems and climbing approximately 600 meters in elevation. Morrison calculated that under normal circumstances, such movement would require at least 4 hours. However, with enemy forces actively pursuing them and time working against their survival, Alpha Team would have to complete the journey in half that time. Rodriguez maintained communication with Guardian 6 while the team moved, receiving updates on enemy positions and movement patterns that helped Morrison adjust their route to avoid potential contact. The mysterious allies' intelligence was remarkably detailed and consistently accurate, suggesting sophisticated observation capabilities. Guardian 6 reports enemy forces have deployed in 3 groups, Rodriguez informed Morrison quietly. One group pursuing our original route, second group attempting to cut off access to the extraction point, third group establishing overwatch positions on high ground. Morrison absorbed this intelligence while navigating around a particularly challenging rock formation. The enemy's tactical deployment suggested professional leadership and detailed knowledge of the terrain. Their opponents weren't random fighters, this was a coordinated military operation designed specifically to capture or eliminate Alpha Team. Walsh provided rear security as the team moved, periodically scanning behind them for signs of pursuit while maintaining communication with the rest of the team. Through his scope, Walsh could detect movement that wasn't visible to other team members, giving Alpha Team early warning of approaching threats. Alpha 6, multiple heat signatures approximately 1 kilometer behind us, Walsh reported. Looks like at least 8 individuals moving in tactical formation. Morrison acknowledged Walsh's report while continuing to push his team toward higher ground. The pursuing enemy force was gaining ground despite Alpha Team's best efforts, and Morrison realized they might be forced into another firefight before reaching the extraction point. Chen and Kim maintained the middle positions in their movement formation, with Chen carrying demolition charges that could be used to slow enemy pursuit if necessary. Kim monitored each team member's physical condition, watching for signs of exhaustion or injury that could compromise their escape. Santos moved with remarkable endurance despite being the youngest member of the team. His close-quarters combat training had included extensive physical conditioning that served him well in the demanding mountain environment. Santos also served as an early warning system, detecting subtle signs of human presence that others might miss. As Alpha Team climbed toward a narrow pass between 2 peaks, Guardian 6's voice crackled through their communication system with urgent information. Alpha 6, Guardian 6. Enemy force has established blocking position directly ahead of your route. Recommend alternate approach through valley system to your east. Morrison studied his map and realized the alternate route Guardian 6 suggested would add significant distance and time to their movement. However, attempting to fight through an established blocking position would likely result in casualties Alpha Team couldn't afford. Guardian 6, can you provide suppression of the blocking position while we attempt passage? Morrison asked hopefully. Negative, Alpha 6. Blocking position is too well fortified for effective suppression with available assets. Recommend detour through valley approach. Morrison made the difficult decision to follow Guardian 6's recommendation, knowing that the longer route increased their exposure to pursuit while consuming precious time. However, he trusted the judgment of allies who had already demonstrated remarkable tactical knowledge and life-saving capabilities. Alpha Team altered course toward the eastern valley system, beginning a descent that would eventually require them to climb back toward the extraction point from a different direction. Morrison pushed his men hard, knowing that every minute of delay allowed enemy forces to tighten their encirclement. The valley approach led Alpha Team through terrain that offered excellent concealment but also limited visibility of potential threats. Morrison felt increasingly vulnerable as they moved through areas where enemy forces could approach within close range before being detected. Rodriguez suddenly stopped and held up his hand, signaling immediate halt. Through his communication equipment, Rodriguez was receiving transmissions that indicated significant enemy activity in their immediate area. Multiple radio stations coordinating something big, Rodriguez whispered to Morrison. Sounds like they're positioning forces throughout this valley system. Morrison felt the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. Enemy forces were apparently anticipating Alpha Team's alternate route and positioning themselves to intercept the American forces before they could reach the extraction point.
Walsh moved to an elevated position that offered visibility down the valley they were entering.
Through his scope, Walsh could see evidence of recent human activity that suggested enemy forces had indeed moved through the area recently. Fresh tracks, equipment debris, and what looks like defensive preparations approximately 400 meters ahead, Walsh reported quietly. Morrison realized that Alpha Team was potentially moving into another carefully prepared ambush. Their enemies possessed detailed knowledge of the terrain and had apparently anticipated possible escape routes, positioning forces to intercept them regardless of which direction they chose. Chen moved beside Morrison and spoke softly. "Sir, if they've got the valley systems covered, we might need to go straight up and over the peaks. Dangerous as hell, but might be our only option."
Morrison studied the towering mountain peaks that surrounded their position.
Attempting to cross them would require technical climbing skills and equipment they didn't possess, while exposing Alpha Team to extreme weather conditions and potential falls that could be fatal. Guardian 6's voice interrupted Morrison's tactical planning with information that changed everything.
Alpha 6, Guardian 6.
Recommend immediate halt and defensive positions.
Significant enemy force approaching your location from multiple directions.
Morrison immediately signaled his team to take cover among the rocky terrain surrounding their position.
Each man found concealment behind boulders or in natural depressions that offered protection from multiple directions. Through night vision equipment, Morrison could see movement on the ridgelines above their position.
Enemy forces were apparently converging on Alpha Team's location with coordination that suggested real-time intelligence about the Americans' exact position.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6. How did they locate us so precisely? Morrison asked with growing concern.
The response from Guardian 6 contained information that chilled Morrison's blood.
Alpha 6, enemy forces appear to have electronic tracking capabilities. Recommend immediate check of all equipment for electronic devices that could be transmitting location data. Morrison's mind raced through possibilities as he realized their enemies might possess technology that allowed them to track Alpha Team's movement regardless of tactical precautions.
Electronic surveillance capabilities would explain how hostile forces had been able to position themselves so effectively throughout their escape attempts. Rodriguez immediately began scanning their communication equipment for signs of compromise while each team member checked personal gear for devices that might be transmitting their location. The possibility that they were being tracked electronically was terrifying, as it meant no tactical movement could guarantee their safety. Kim discovered the source of their tracking problem when he examined the medical monitoring devices attached to each team member's equipment. Standard-issue health sensors designed to monitor vital signs during missions were apparently transmitting data that enemy forces had learned to intercept and use for targeting purposes. Medical sensors are broadcasting on frequencies that could be intercepted, Kim reported quietly.
If they've got the right equipment, they can track our exact location in real time.
Morrison felt anger and betrayal as he realized their own equipment had been compromised, possibly deliberately, to make Alpha Team easier targets for enemy forces. Someone with detailed knowledge of their operational procedures had ensured they could be tracked and targeted throughout their mission. All stations, disable medical monitoring devices immediately, Morrison commanded. Each team member quickly removed and destroyed their medical sensors, eliminating the electronic signatures that had been betraying their position to enemy forces. However, Morrison knew the damage had already been done, as hostile forces were now close enough to pursue them visually. Walsh peered through his scope and provided updated intelligence that confirmed Morrison's fears.
Multiple groups converging on our position. Count at least 20 individuals from 3 different directions. We're about to be surrounded.
Morrison realized Alpha Team was facing their most critical moment. Enemy forces were closing in from multiple directions with superior numbers and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Their communication with Guardian 6 was their only advantage, but Morrison still didn't know what capabilities their mysterious ally possessed.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6. We need immediate support. Enemy forces are about to overrun our position.
Guardian 6's response carried a tone of calm confidence that seemed almost supernatural given their desperate circumstances. Alpha 6, maintain defensive positions.
Support is inbound. Prepare for precision engagement of multiple targets.
Morrison had no idea what Guardian 6 meant by precision engagement, but he ordered his team to prepare for contact while maintaining defensive positions that offered the best possible fields of fire.
Chen quickly placed demolition charges to create obstacles that would channel enemy movement into areas where Alpha Team could engage them effectively.
Kim prepared medical supplies for immediate use, knowing that casualties were likely in the coming engagement. Santos and Walsh positioned themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire that would allow them to engage enemy forces approaching from multiple directions. Rodriguez continued monitoring radio communications while maintaining contact with Guardian 6. The first enemy fighters appeared on the ridge above Alpha Team's position, moving carefully but confidently as they prepared to assault the Americans' defensive positions.
Morrison could see at least 6 hostile fighters positioning themselves for coordinated attack. Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Enemy forces in position for assault. Where is the support you promised? Morrison asked urgently.
The answer came not through their radio system, but through the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle fired from an elevated position somewhere in the mountains around them. Morrison watched through night vision equipment as one of the enemy fighters on the ridge suddenly collapsed, eliminated by a shot that had come from an impossible distance. 4 more rifle shots followed in rapid succession, each one fired with mechanical precision and deadly accuracy. 4 more enemy fighters fell before they could even identify the source of the incoming fire. The remaining hostile forces on the ridge immediately took cover, their assault completely disrupted by the mysterious marksman's intervention. Morrison felt amazement and relief as he realized Guardian 6 wasn't a military unit or intelligence team. Guardian 6 was a single individual with extraordinary marksmanship capabilities who had been providing overwatch for Alpha Team throughout their escape attempt. Walsh studied the area where the shots had originated and reported with professional admiration. Alpha 6, those shots came from at least 800 meters away in extremely challenging wind conditions. Whoever Guardian 6 is, they're operating at a level I've never seen before. As enemy forces regrouped and attempted to identify their hidden adversary, Morrison realized that Alpha Team's salvation depended entirely on one person whose identity, motives, and capabilities remained completely mysterious. The concealed marksman had already demonstrated the ability to eliminate multiple targets with impossible accuracy, but Morrison wondered how long one person could hold off superior numbers of enemy forces. The final phase of Alpha Team's desperate escape was about to begin, and everything depended on 5 perfect shots that would determine whether 6 Navy SEALs lived to see another day. The enemy forces regrouped with professional efficiency that impressed Morrison despite their desperate circumstances. Rather than retreating after losing 5 men to Guardian 6 precision shooting, the hostile fighters began implementing counter-sniper tactics that suggested extensive training and battlefield experience. Morrison watched through night vision equipment as enemy forces split into multiple groups, using terrain features to mask their movement while attempting to triangulate Guardian 6's position. Their opponents understood they were facing a single marksman of exceptional ability, and they were adapting their tactics accordingly. Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Enemy forces are implementing counter-sniper protocols. Can you maintain effectiveness against coordinated suppression? Morrison asked quietly into his microphone. The response came with calm confidence that seemed almost supernatural given their tactical situation. Alpha 6, Guardian 6. Enemy coordination is anticipated. Maintain defensive positions and prepare for immediate movement on my command. Morrison felt confusion mixed with hope as he tried to understand what Guardian 6 meant. How could one person, regardless of marksmanship skills, effectively engage multiple groups of trained fighters who were actively hunting for his position? Rodriguez suddenly looked up from his communication equipment with excitement in his voice. Sir, I'm picking up radio chatter indicating enemy forces have identified multiple possible sniper positions. They're confused about Guardian 6's actual location. Morrison realized that Guardian 6 was apparently using advanced fieldcraft to create uncertainty about his position among enemy forces. By firing from different locations or using techniques that disguised muzzle signatures, the mysterious marksman was forcing their opponents to spread their efforts across multiple areas rather than concentrating on a single position. Walsh peered through his scope toward areas where enemy movement was visible and reported with professional admiration. Whoever Guardian 6 is, they understand advanced sniper tactics better than anyone I've ever seen. The enemy forces are wasting time and resources searching for positions that have probably already been abandoned. Chen checked his demolition charges and spoke quietly to Morrison. Sir, if Guardian 6 can keep them confused for another 10 minutes, I can set charges that will create a distraction large enough to cover our movement toward the extraction point. Morrison weighed Chen's suggestion carefully. Explosive charges would definitely create confusion among enemy forces, but they would also reveal Alpha Team's exact position and intentions. The gamble was whether Guardian 6 could provide enough suppression to allow successful movement after their position was compromised. Santos detected movement in a gully approximately 200 meters from their position and alerted the team to potential threats approaching from an unexpected direction. Morrison studied the area Santos indicated and realized enemy forces were attempting to flank their defensive positions while other groups maintained pressure from the front.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Enemy flanking movement approximately 200 meters southeast of our position. 3 to 4 individuals using dead ground approach. Guardian 6's response was immediate and decisive. Alpha 6, flanking element will be neutralized. Prepare for movement in 60 seconds.
Morrison heard a single rifle shot followed by the sound of loose rocks cascading down a mountainside. Through night vision equipment, he could see that the flanking movement had stopped completely, suggesting Guardian 6 had eliminated the lead elements of the approaching enemy force. Kim monitored each team member's condition while preparing medical equipment for immediate use during their upcoming movement. Despite the stress and physical demands of their situation, all team members remained combat effective, though Morrison knew their endurance wouldn't last indefinitely. 2 more rifle shots echoed across the mountains in rapid succession, each followed by immediate cessation of enemy movement from specific directions. Morrison realized Guardian 6 was systematically eliminating key personnel from each enemy group, disrupting their coordination and reducing their effective strength. Guardian 6 is definitely moving between positions, Walsh observed quietly. Shot signatures are coming from different locations with intervals that suggest rapid displacement and immediate re-engagement. That's extremely advanced tactical capability. Morrison felt growing amazement at Guardian 6's abilities. Moving between sniper positions while maintaining accuracy and effectiveness against multiple targets required skills that few individuals possessed. Their mysterious ally was operating at a level that exceeded even elite military snipers. Rodriguez received additional radio intelligence that provided insights into enemy thinking. "Sir, their communications indicate significant casualties and confusion about Guardian 6 capabilities. Some units are requesting permission to withdraw." Morrison allowed himself a moment of hope as he realized Guardian 6's psychological impact was exceeding the physical casualties inflicted. Enemy forces were becoming demoralized by facing an opponent whose capabilities seemed almost superhuman. Chen's voice interrupted Morrison's thoughts with urgent information. "Sir, I can hear vehicle engines starting up in the valley. Sounds like they're bringing up heavy weapons or reinforcements." Morrison's tactical situation became critical again as he realized enemy forces were escalating their response to Guardian 6's intervention. Vehicle-mounted weapons could provide suppression fire that would neutralize Guardian 6's positional advantages while delivering devastating firepower against Alpha Team's defensive positions. Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Enemy forces appear to be bringing vehicle support. Can you engage mobile targets effectively? Guardian 6's response carried a tone of grim satisfaction that surprised Morrison. Alpha 6, vehicle targets are priority engagement. Recommend immediate movement when engagement commences. Morrison heard the distinctive sound of a large-caliber rifle being fired, followed immediately by a tremendous explosion from the valley below. The blast illuminated the entire mountainside briefly, revealing the silhouettes of enemy forces scrambling for cover. Vehicle elimination confirmed, Guardian 6 reported with professional calm. Secondary explosions indicate ammunition or fuel ignition. Enemy vehicle support neutralized. Morrison felt amazement at Guardian 6 capabilities. Engaging vehicle targets at extended range required not only exceptional marksmanship but also detailed knowledge of vehicle vulnerabilities and appropriate ammunition selection. Walsh studied the valley through his scope and provided confirmation of Guardian 6's success. Massive secondary explosions down there. Looks like Guardian 6 hit something that created a chain reaction. Enemy forces in the valley are definitely neutralized. Morrison made the critical decision that would determine Alpha Team's survival. With enemy vehicle support eliminated and ground forces disrupted by Guardian 6 precision shooting, this represented their best opportunity to reach the extraction point. All stations, this is Alpha 6. We're moving immediately toward extraction point. Continuous movement, no halts except for casualties. Guardian 6 will provide overwatch. Alpha Team rose from their defensive positions and began their final movement toward safety. Morrison led his men across terrain that would have been impassable under normal circumstances, but adrenaline and desperation drove them beyond their usual physical limitations. Guardian 6 rifle spoke 5 more times during Alpha Team's movement, each shot eliminating enemy fighters who attempted to interfere with the Americans' escape. Morrison never saw muzzle flashes or heard bullet impacts, only the distinctive crack of the marksman's weapon followed by the immediate cessation of enemy threats. The extraction point was located on a plateau that offered helicopter access while providing defensive positions until rescue arrived. Morrison's team reached the area just as dawn began breaking over the mountains, revealing the full scope of the battlefield where they'd fought for survival throughout the night. Rodriguez immediately began transmitting on emergency frequencies, calling for extraction and providing their exact location. To Morrison's relief, response came within minutes from a rescue helicopter that had been standing by in case Alpha Team re-established communications. As the rescue helicopter approached their position, Morrison attempted to contact Guardian 6 one final time.
Guardian 6, Alpha 6. Extraction inbound. What are your plans for evacuation? The response surprised Morrison with its finality. Alpha 6, Guardian 6. Mission complete. No extraction required. Safe travels. Morrison realized that Guardian 6 had no intention of revealing his identity or accepting extraction with Alpha Team. Their mysterious savior would disappear back into the mountains as quietly as he had appeared, leaving only questions about his identity and motives. The rescue helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and debris, with rescue personnel immediately moving to assist Alpha Team's boarding. Morrison was the last to enter the aircraft, taking one final look at the mountainous terrain where they'd nearly died. Through the helicopter's window, Morrison caught a glimpse of a solitary figure silhouetted against the morning sky on a distant ridge. The figure stood motionless for several moments before disappearing into the rocky terrain, leaving no trace of his presence. During the flight back to their forward operating base, Morrison reflected on the night's events and tried to understand who Guardian 6 might have been. The marksman's capabilities suggested extensive military training, but his equipment and tactics indicated resources beyond typical military issue. Walsh studied the mountains below through the helicopter's window and spoke quietly to Morrison. "Sir, I counted at least 15 confirmed eliminations by Guardian 6. Every shot was perfect, every engagement was precisely timed. I've never seen anything like it." Morrison nodded silently, knowing that Alpha Team owed their lives to someone whose identity would probably remain forever mysterious. Guardian 6 had appeared when needed most, provided exactly the support required for survival, and vanished without explanation or recognition. Rodriguez attempted to research Guardian 6 through official channels after their return to base, but found no records of any individual or unit using that designation. Military intelligence had no information about friendly forces operating in their area of operations, and satellite imagery revealed no evidence of additional personnel in the mountains. Chen theorized that Guardian 6 might have been a former special operations soldier operating independently, possibly someone with personal reasons for targeting the enemy forces that had ambushed Alpha Team. However, no intelligence supported this theory, and the marksman's capabilities exceeded anything Chen had seen during his military career. Kim suggested Guardian 6 might have been a local fighter with exceptional skills who had chosen to help American forces for reasons of his own. However, the tactical knowledge and equipment Guardian 6 had demonstrated suggested training and resources far beyond local capabilities. Santos remained quietly convinced that Guardian 6 had been watching over them since their initial insertion, possibly monitoring their mission from the beginning and preparing to intervene if necessary. However, this theory raised questions about how Guardian 6 had known about their mission and why he had chosen to help them. Morrison eventually concluded that Guardian 6's identity was less important than the lesson his intervention had provided. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurked in every shadow and survival depended on split-second decisions, sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. The official mission report listed Alpha Team's survival as the result of successful tactical movement and enemy miscalculation. No mention was made of Guardian 6's intervention, partly because his assistance couldn't be officially verified and partly because Morrison respected the mysterious marksman's apparent desire for anonymity. Alpha Team returned to operational status within a week of their rescue, but each member carried memories of that night in the mountains when 5 perfect shots had saved their lives. They never again encountered Guardian 6 or learned his true identity, but they never forgot the debt they owed to the concealed sharpshooter who had emerged from the shadows when they needed him most.
In the years that followed, Morrison often wondered if Guardian 6 was still operating somewhere in the world's conflict zones, providing protection for soldiers who would never know how close they came to death. The thought that such individuals existed, watching over those who served in harm's way, provided comfort during subsequent dangerous missions. The mystery of Guardian 6 became a legend among Special Operations Forces, passed down through informal channels as a reminder that sometimes the most crucial support comes from sources that can't be identified or officially acknowledged. His 5 perfect shots had saved 6 lives and created a story that would inspire warriors facing impossible odds for generations to come. Morrison never learned Guardian 6's name, never saw his face, and never had the opportunity to thank him personally. But, in the brotherhood of warriors who understand that survival often depends on factors beyond training and equipment, Guardian 6's intervention represented the highest ideals of service, sacrifice, and the mysterious bonds that connect those who fight for freedom and justice in the darkest corners of the world.